please shortly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Charles. I'm from Montreal, Canada, and I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Cultural Diversity in Canada, and also out of Canada, the General Secretary of the Federation, International Federation of Coalitions for Cultural Diversity, with chapters in 43 countries. The coalition is a grouping of associations of cultural professionals representing all sectors of cultural industries and all field of the value chain. So we have the writers in the film industry, we have the producers in the film industry, we have the actors, and we have not only the film industry, but we have the music industry, the book publishing, magazines, and so on. So these are the industries that benefit from the support of national, regional, and local governments to be able to exist, to produce and share creative works that are indigenous, that have been sort of telling our stories in Canada and our stories to audiences in Canada. The coalition was set up by these associations 15 years ago in response to the globalization movement, realizing that there was a strong push at the World Trade Organization, OECD, in bilateral and multilateral trade negotiations to open up pretty much every sector of the economy to trade, which is, you know, what every government wants to do because it's good for business, it's good for growth, it's good for jobs. And then we sort of realized, well, if we're open to all, we're going to have more multinational, more foreign products, more in a language that is not our language, stories that are not our stories. And maybe the system of policies and measures that have made it possible to develop our own expressions is going to be at risk, is going to disappear, because what governments do when they negotiate trade agreements is to level the playing field, to create conditions that are equal in both markets, so there is no impediment, there are no barriers, and there is no discrimination between domestic industries and foreign industries. So we said, if that's what's happening to lumber and cars and all the other sectors, it's great, but culture, this has to do with us. It has to do with our soul, with our spirit, with our language, with our symbolic value and identity. It's a product, but it's also more than a product. So we said, wait a minute, this is not just any product. It has a dual nature. It has a specific, we call this the cultural exception. It's exceptional when compared to all other products and services, and it should be treated differently. And that's why we set up this coalition. We are a what we call non-for-profit organization, an NGO basically, and this was established under the Non-for-Profit Corporation Act in Canada. So we're basically an advocacy, awareness raising, influencer, watchdog. You know, we're fortunately, because we bring so many cultural associations, we have a lot of expertise. We follow very closely these trade discussions. We follow UNESCO discussions. We're really informed on the UNESCO convention. So when governments need technical expertise and input into policy making, they turn to us. They say, oh, the coalition is one voice. It speaks on behalf of all. We've totally represent 200,000 cultural workers and more than 2,000 businesses in all sectors. So it's very convenient to sort of say, let's have a dialogue with these people. So again, to being very practical, when we have trade negotiations, and this has happened recently with Europe, there was a Canada-Europe trade discussion where culture was an issue, and recently the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, what we did is we went and met with the chief negotiators. We signed an agreement. Everything is going to be confidential. We cannot use this to speak publicly and comment publicly, but because we have access, then we can influence and we can be part of the discussion on the objective of the strategy, on the text itself, have our legal advisors in the room with us. So it's very, very powerful, and the relationship is win-win. I mean, they appreciate the relationship.
It's familiar yet alien concept to us because we have the consultancy organizations, NGOs and everything, but They do heavy work, but nobody listens to them.
Yeah, but it takes a while you need to build a trust.
Yes.
You need, because some NGOs are just out there shouting and marching and prefer to take a very vocal position, and those exist. And they will want also to be invited and participate in these discussions on trade. They will call on the secrecy of trade negotiations and at every turn say, oh, we don't have access. We have access, but the counterpart is that we have to remain very discreet in the way. So it's a position that we've had even before I joined the coalition. Traditionally, when we argued for the convention, there was this very strong alliance between civil society, ministers, civil servants, to push the agenda of the convention both nationally and internationally. This started 15 years ago, and I just continued the tradition of working closely with civil servants. The coalition is, I would call it a constellation. That's why the word federation is probably appropriate, because realities, as you can imagine, are very different in developed countries such as France, Canada, Sweden, Germany, even Turkey. I hear that you have associations that are being recognized officially for the book publishing, for the film, and so on. These trade organizations are much more structured than in other sectors or parts of the world, where artists are even just trying to make a living, just trying to have recognition of status of the artist, trying to have copyright protection, and trying just even to have basic public policy for the arts and culture with the funding, which is always and most of the time lacking. So the needs are very different, even for one same region. If you think of Africa, South Africa is so developed. If you think of Egypt and its cinema industry, and if you think of Morocco, but if you go to Niger in the middle of the desert, or you go to Burkina Faso, so the needs and the capacity are very, very diverse in each region. And therefore also is civil society in the way that it organizes itself. Now, fortunately, the coalition model is more or less sort of well understood. It's also more or less well recognized, as we have a voice in the UNESCO instrument. It sort of says at Article 11, civil society will participate in these debates, and therefore it gives legitimacy to groups to come together, try and learn how to govern themselves, how to structure and have one voice when engaging with governments. They're learning. It's part of the learning process, because obviously an artist traditionally would go to government for his own work, would not go to defend the group of artists and ultimately the group of policies that are required for the sector. Yes. Yeah, so it's a learning curve to be able to dedicate yourself to the greater good and the greater cause than just your own creative needs. Well, the coalitions are in need everywhere of good governance. The issue is that we have strong individuals in each country, and these individuals tend to be very busy. They have a lot on their plate. They can be teacher, activist, also artists themselves. Sometimes they are in government as advisors. Sometimes they are elected as ministers. And so you find many of these individuals in a lot of countries that are holding, the flame. What needs to happen is for these individuals to broaden the tent, to bring in the coalition, to have younger people come in, a diversity of people participate in the discussion, open up democracy. So eventually when these individuals leave or they're too busy, fortunately there are others to join and participate. That's a real challenge for any coalition, because this has been 15 years now. So as you can imagine, people have gone older, they're moving on to other things, some have died, and so if it's only one person, the risk is that it will die with this one person. So you really have to think long term. And also I think the risk is that the other risk is that we have a lot of knowledge on the convention itself, which is a legal text basically. So you can learn the text, you can explain the text, but if you don't substantiate the text with evidence of what it's meant to serve, what kind of results, what kind of positive outcome, if you don't have evidence to demonstrate the benefit of the convention to anyone that you meet, whether it's fellow citizens, whether it's fellow politicians, whether it's fellow cultural workers. You need those arguments so people will say, oh, I understand why it's important, why I need this. If they get it, they're convinced you've done your job, because they will spread the word and they will become involved in the convention. So there's a need for renewal, there's a need for strong arguments based on evidence, and there's a need also for continuity. That's also an issue. In government, civil servants will come and go, politicians come and go so fast, so you need in the civil society to have continuity of knowledge and continuity of commitment. So these are three: governance, evidence and messaging, and continuity.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.